Hello there, I hope you're well. This is going to be a video today on sample libraries. Sample libraries is this thing that they're quite a new thing in terms of how popular they are. They're not actually that new. I got my first sample library probably about 15 years ago. But what they are is hyper-realistic versions of virtual instruments. The reason for that is because, well, it's in the name. It's a sample of a real instrument that someone then spends probably hundreds of hours programming so that when you hit your D note on your keyboard or write it in your DAW, you get the sound of an orchestra. Now, you can do this type of stuff with virtual synthesis if you've got, the right tools and equipment, but there's just something slightly different. So I want to really go through, right, what is a sample library, what's involved, why are they so wonderful, but then what's the cons? Is it expensive? Is it not? Like all these different things, because you might have heard things about Kontakt. What is that? You've got Spitfire, Crow Hill Company, sorry. There's all these different things that you'll see online, and if you're quite new or you're just starting to explore, like, I just want a nice sounding string pack, you'll start looking into sample libraries and very quickly go, whoa, what a rabbit hole. I've been down the rabbit hole. I'm still, unfortunately, at the bottom of the hole trying to climb my way up. But hopefully some of my experiences you'll be able to take a bit of kind of advice from and learn from. And yeah, either potentially save a little bit of money or a bit of time. So I'll jump straight in. So what is a sample library? Well, you could get a virtual instrument. What's a virtual instrument? Imagine it's like a plugin that you kind of overlay on your keys, or you're in your DAW or guitar pedal. It's a similar type of thing. And, you're going to turn your guitar using a pedal into a synth, using some kind of like oscillators and some things like that. You can get quite close to some really, genuine instrument sounds. Like I think there's one where you can turn your guitar into like an actual vocal. There's loads of different things you can do. And that's all done through modulating the sound and like physically altering the sound. What ends up happening is you get to a certain point and you go, it's brilliant, but it's not like the real thing. That's what samples and sample libraries come in, basically. So what's a sample? I could make a sound, just made a click. That click I could use as my actual click track if I really wanted to. But the actual recording of that sound I've just captured and digitally put somewhere, or not necessarily digital, but I've put it somewhere. That's a sample. So that when I press my middle C on my keyboard, it's not going to play in this case, but it would play a click. There's loads of sampling devices. I'm not going to get massively into sampling specifically, but that's the premise. Take that really far then and go, okay, famous drum kits, Roland TR-08, weirdly, completely rubbish at launch, complete failure of a product initially, somehow found a resurrection, bam, it's now probably the most sampled drum kit in the world, right? And you've done recreations of it, but the sample of the sound, the character, and all the transients and everything else is so widely loved that people now, they've made plugins that emulate it and all sorts. You can actually get the samples in a library, which is basically, you can click some instruments on here. I should actually be able to show you. So let me swap into my DAW here. I've got all these different things. If you've got battery, this is a native instrument drum sample library, basically. Some would say it's a drum machine, like virtual synthesizer, but it's more of a sample library. And you can see they've got 707, 808. So I can just click on here, this, you've got multiple tuned, and suddenly, and then that's mapped across your keyboard, so you can, oops, sorry, I've still got all my other instruments hooked up to that, but, and depending on how it's mapped, I've got an entire, I've got an 808 there, so that's really, really simple, non-orchestral version of how and what a sample library is. It goes much, much deeper than that. So, imagine you want to play with an orchestra for a day. Really expensive, okay? What you do instead is you get a sample library. And what happens is you say, right, I'd love to just have a cello and some brass maybe playing a really fat, low-end D note. Brilliant. Perfect. Recording done, move on. Doesn't really work like that because you'd want to make the most of it, so you give them an entire piece and whatever you want to do. So in actuality, what happens is you say, right, rather than just playing D, what if we played every single note on your keyboard? Not on your keyboard, sorry, every single note possible by your instruments, and then mapped it to keyboard. So you've got... That's what happens. How about then you get every single articulation, so soft, medium, like really high velocity, dynamic. You've got the legato stuff, so it's like, you know, that's the long sustained notes. And then you've got all the staccato notes. Record every single variation of that, and then you'd have hundreds of thousands of samples or audio files. Using then software, they get compiled into sample libraries. Now, lots of things can happen with sample libraries. I'm not going to go into specifics of plugins and things and specific sample libraries because it gets complicated. Excuse me. It gets complicated quite quickly. But this is in essence what you end up with. So the way it works, probably 80% of sample libraries that exist are handled through some type of middleware software. It's not to be confused with actual middleware software for like game soundtrack composition and integration, but it's the best way to think of it because we've got these hundreds of audio files that are samples and clips of these things that you want, and this then interfaces those samples to your keyboard. And that's what, in essence, a sample library does. Now, just to be clear, it's not necessarily orchestral related. You know, you can get it for literally anything. Percussion, synthesizers, guitars. You can see that I've got an acoustic guitar. Most of my stuff tends to be orchestral because, as you can see, I've got 2 keyboards. I can do lots of actual synthesis, but the one thing I can't replicate very well is really beautiful emotive strings. That's where the sample library comes in. You spend some money, and some engineer goes out somewhere with the best microphones in the world, incredible performing musicians, probably spend hundreds of thousands of pounds doing so. They sell you all those sounds in a sample library, you know, maps to every single key on your keyboard, not necessarily every key, but just as a principle, yeah? And then they sell you the library at a fraction of the cost. That's the first thing I want to speak about then, is the cost. What do you really need to get stuck in with sample libraries? Not every sample library is really expensive. However, you do tend to need to buy Kontakt as a starter. You can buy you can use something called Kontakt Player, which is basically a free tool that will play samples. Some work with it, some don't. So really kind of do your own research and explore. But Kontakt itself is, as you said, this middleware software. Now, if you do look to buy it, it is a paid software to get the proper edition, but it comes with something like 900 different instruments or sounds. It's about 45 gigabytes of sounds, varying from strings to guitar. There's all sorts of stuff in there. And yeah, if you're hunting for, I don't know, like one of the things I looked for recently was a hurdy-gurdy. It exists. Someone has made a hurdy-gurdy VST that is pretty decent. It's not perfect, but you can get some sample libraries that sound phenomenal. So Synphobia was my first sample library. I still use it to this day and people go, wow, what is that? So that's in like a staccato fashion, yeah? Now, sample libraries have their own little drawbacks and things. So you can see here, I've got all these different options: performance, staccato, maccato, etc. all of these libraries are programmed slightly differently, which is the other con of them. So I could turn it to sustain here or crescendo or do all of these different things, which is brilliant. But if I'm doing a live performance, sometimes you have something called key switching, which is where I could play it all the way down to, say, C0 round about here. And then that's going to force the instrument to go from being in staccato mode to sustain mode. Not every single sample library does that. And so every single library is really different. So if you really do start down this rabbit hole, you genuinely have to study every single kind of piece of software that you want to buy, because they're really not all made equally. You don't have to spend a lot of money. So Symphobia, when I bought it, was about £1,200. I've got pieces of software that cost me £50 that sound arguably better in some regards. Like the staccato section sounds better on this other plugin, which I'm not going to talk about just yet because I'm planning on doing a video about it. But then this Symphobia package currently has got a million more different expressions and like crescendo. There's all these different swells and stuff, so you really have to know, okay, what is it I'm after? Am I after like a really beautiful like melodic legato thing? Or am I looking for something that's like an all-in-one? Very quickly, your price range will go from being this big to colossal. And it's a bit like the same with digital audio workstations, to be honest. Some are just basic, and then you kind of add all your bits in, like Reaper. Some are literally all-in-one production suites, like Cubase, Logic. They cost far more, but they do a lot more on the tin. Doesn't mean you're limited by them, but you've got all your own little modular aspects you can put on. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. I'll try and move on as quickly as I can, so very quickly, the way I get around limitations of some of my instruments, some of you may have watched my other video, you then end up building composing templates where you group instruments together based off how they play. They may have some weird software limitations, so they may only play a particular sound or style. I'll play you some sustained string stuff just so you get a flavour of what that sounds like. Turn the choirs off. Now, this is completely unmixed, this template, and it's loads of different layers of instruments. If I played one on its own, which would be Symphobia strings, and you can very quickly build layers and make a really lush sound. And then your talent as an actual like engineer or sound designer, whatever is your bread and butter, you can really get stuck in with all that type of stuff then. So, what are the other drawbacks to think of? These things use a lot of system memory, and you normally need quite a good processor as well. So, two different aspects of the memory bit. I should have rephrased that better, but your storage and your RAM. So, I'll show you the RAM side. If I was to open up these BBC instruments, which are fantastic, by the way, highly recommend them. This is Labs. It is normally free. I think when I got it, you just have to send off a form, wait a week, you get a free code through. Now it's about, I think you can just buy it for £50 or wherever your currency is here. But top left, CPU usage 0, disk usage 0, memory usage 6.25 gigabytes. And when we say memory, that's my RAM, not my storage. Storage-wise, again, depending on the qualities of samples, how they're recorded, they can go from being 500 megabytes to 500 gigabytes quite quickly. So my entire sample library, this is no exaggeration, is about 14 terabytes. I physically cannot install them all at once because, quite frankly, I'm not made of money and don't want to have a massive RAID system of sample libraries and things. But if I was to install every single plugin I own, sample library, it would be colossal, and there's no way I'd be able to build a project that has them all in. So I don't, and I just get what I need, I load in separate projects, and bish bash bosh. That being said, everything I use currently just in this orchestral template is probably about 1 terabyte to maybe 1.25 terabytes, because I've paid for really high quality samples. Remember before, if I've got 88 iterations, well, I've got 88 keys on a piano, firstly. I've then got a low, a medium, high velocity, maybe more. I'll have a close mic position, potentially, an ambient mic position, and then I might have, like a mid-range mic. Most do like 3 as kind of like a sweet spot. And then I've got legato, staccato, sustain, and then I might have another 20 variations, all being recorded probably at close to lossless to get mastered down to 48k WAV files. Straight away, you're probably looking at several thousand, if not like tens of thousands of files. If every one of those articulations of just me playing that is 40 something megabytes, very quickly you can see where the space goes, right? So I'm probably over exaggerating a touch, but that's kind of one of the things to really consider. So this is Spitfire. I forgot to mention that. It's not Kontakt, it's Spitfire. So there are other companies that build their own in-house like middleware software, if you wish. So Spitfire is probably the top in terms of orchestral stuff. Native Instruments Kontakt, which is the one I mentioned before, is much broader in terms of what it covers. It literally does everything. 80% of people probably use that for day-to-day stuff. And then you've got I'll just very quickly show off. You've got Crow Hill Company, which is, stuff like this. So if I was to try and play this one very quickly, honestly, just watch out for that. These are phenomenal. Really expressive. Now, this plugin's really slow on the attack, whereas some of my other plugins are really quick on the attack. And this is what you tend to find, like every single sample library that exists excels at something. And you go from having 1 to 2 to 3, and before you know it, you end up with massive library. They do cost a lot of money for the top end ones. So my advice would be genuinely look at what it is you're trying to accomplish with samples. Can you get away with just paying someone to send you a sample of something and using it? Or even getting a free one online? Do it. You can get free Kontakt libraries, and you can get free other libraries. It's not Kontakt, but other things. But just understand, right, if I'm making a piece of music, what is it I'm after? Is it the strings? Is it the drums? Is it this? And then you can kind of go down that rabbit hole then of going, okay, what's the best drum sample libraries? You normally can get like a top 5 list. You've got, just as an example, Superior Drummer and Addictive Drums are like the 2 best ones. And then you've got some kind of mid-tier ones. And it varies from about, I think, £200 on the upper end of the scale down to £50. But you then can get expansions and so on and so on. So it does get quite complicated, but start with, right, what is it I need? And then you can kind of explore, because it's overwhelming. It really is. If you don't know what you're looking for, you look at the world of sample libraries and go, oh my God, it's too much. The other solution is you can get some amazing deals. I'm not sponsored by Native Instruments, but one of the best deals I've ever seen, and I've personally took it up myself, is Native Instruments own Complete and the Kontakt bundles and such. So you can get a MIDI keyboard with about, I think the last version I looked at is about 5 terabytes of different sample libraries for about £1,000. Really quite impressive when you consider if you used to spend a day in a studio recording something, it would cost you more than £1,000 if you've got more than if you're doing more than just renting the space out. Like if you've got a quartet in, or it genuinely will cost you infinitely more, and you've got them forever. So it's just something to be kind of considerate of. One last thing I wanted to show then is I only showed off the RAM usage on Spitfire. This one plugin here is using 600 meg of my RAM. How much is this one using? It's probably not even going to load. This is using 2.3 gigabytes. So I've got the 6.9 gigabytes from those BBC ones. What about these ones here? Let's click on this one. 6.2 gigs still. So you need to have a good system that has a lot of storage. Again, it depends how far down the rabbit hole you want to go, but decent storage. I'd probably say like a terabyte is like really quite safe, genuinely. Decent RAM. I'd say 16 gig is a minimum. I personally wouldn't say it's enough if you're going like big scale, composing templates like this. You need at least 32 gig if you're doing like proper big orchestral templates where you just want to come on, you've got all your instruments ready to go, and then you just record your lines onto everything that you want. That's the way I've gone personally, because it just suits me better. But what you can do is record your bit that you want, disable the instrument, or render it as an audio file, and then do that way. You don't have to have massive amounts of RAM, okay? But like, it's just something to consider, because you'll hit a bit of a point where, especially if you're like doing something like I am now, where I'm streaming this live, I've lost 20% of my CPU and RAM straight away. So it's like, yeah, just lots of things to consider. I will probably stop there, otherwise this video could go on for 30-something minutes. But I hope that gives you a flavour of what is a sample library and, kind of what's involved with it. If you have any questions at all, please just drop them in the comments or send me a message directly, because my whole ethos and mission is, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on everything, but one of the things I love is, sample libraries and composing and things like this. So I'll always happily share my information if it benefits just one person. So yeah, on that note, have a lovely day. Apologies for the rather lengthy video and for my potential divergence and tangents and things. I am neurodivergent, so do apologise, but yeah, I think we've held on quite well. And yeah, have a lovely rest of your day, wherever you are. Take care.